Welcome to the third video on integrating the environmental evaluation into the conservation planning process. In this video, we will make the field visit. Before we go to the farm, we will assemble forms and information to take to the field, such as an aerial map, topographic map, and LiDAR hillshade map of the fields, soils maps and reports, a resource concern checklist, and some applicable special environmental concerns guide sheets. You may also need the SVAP2 forms and instructions and some land use specific inventory sheets such as cropping history forms, pesticide application forms, nutrient application forms, and forms to record irrigation information. We should also gather some needed tools such as a sharpshooter shovel, soil probe, wire flags, a clinometer, a 100-foot tape measure, a GPS, and a camera. Some of the tools are not only important for evaluating the resources, but can be used as a visual aid to show the producer resource concerns. We will begin step 3 to inventory the resources. We have assembled general inventory data and information about the planting area before the field visit begins. Now we should be prepared to relate to resource questions and to raise the client's awareness of issues influencing the planning process. The planning process is an educational effort whereby the client and planner acquire additional knowledge regarding the client's enterprises and the resources, and share that knowledge. The inventory phase of planning is a critical part of that educational process, and we must work together with the client on site to develop a picture of existing conditions, trends, resource concerns, and opportunities. To start the inventory process, you meet Mr. Smith on his farm. You review his objectives from the assistance notes with him and ask him if the statement captures his objectives. He agrees that it does. You ask him to explain how he would like to see his productivity increase. He explains that in the past his yields were around 100 bushels of corn and 40 bushels of soybeans, but have dropped to around 80 bushels of corn and 30 bushels of soybeans. You ask what would be his goal for yields. He states that the 100 bushels of corn and 40 bushels of soybeans would be desirable. You make a note to update his objective statement. You and Mr. Smith go to his cropland fields. You take out your sharpshooter and dig a slice of soil. You notice that there is little soil structure in the surface layer. There is a compaction layer at 6 inches deep. There are very few roots below 6 inches, and there is very little surface residue. While you and Mr. Smith look at the soil slice, you point those things out to him. You ask him to describe his tillage system, and he tells you he uses a rotation of 2 years of corn and 1 year of soybeans. He states that he discs once in the fall and once or twice in the spring. Then he chisel plows and plants on 30-inch rows. He says he usually has to cultivate once in June, then harvests in September. As you walk around the fields, you use a wire flag to check for compaction and point out compacted areas to Mr. Smith. You describe to him how compaction limits the root growth and decreases the water available to the plants. You lay out your 100-foot tape and use it to estimate the surface residue to be 25%. You mention to Mr. Smith that crop residue protects the soil from raindrop impact and soil erosion, and that more residue can help to increase organic matter in the soil. You briefly explain the benefits of organic matter in the soil. He asks if there are some things that he could do to improve the organic matter and decrease the compaction problems. You tell him yes, that reduced tillage and cover crops may help, and you will look into some alternatives that include those practices. He tells you he would be interested in doing something if it would improve his yields, and he has noticed that his neighbors seem to be doing a lot less tillage. He has also noticed that some of them use cover crops. You check your resource concern checklist, and since there is not 90% ground cover, you make a note to run Russell II or IET to determine sheet and rill erosion. You shoot the slopes of the fields and determine the slope length to be a 3% slope on 100-foot slope length on field 1, a 2% slope on 150-foot slope length on field 2, and a 4% slope on a 75-foot slope length on field 3. You notice that the crop rows run across the slope but are not truly on contour, so you estimate the row grade to be 1%. You notice some ephemeral gullies in the fields. You verified there are some gullies at the edge of the field where the concentrated flow of water enters the stream. You ask him about his fertilization program and soil tests, and he states that he has not soil tested in 5 years. He knives in anhydrous ammonium nitrogen in split applications to his corn. He has not applied other fertilizer. You ask about his pesticide application, and he tells you that he applies atrazine on his corn. You ask if he sprays at a certain time, and he says he walks his fields to check to see if there are enough weeds to justify spraying. You ask if he considers the weather before spraying. He says he won't spray if there is rain or high winds forecasted. You notice there are no ponded or wet areas in the fields. You ask if he irrigates, and he answers no. You ask if he considers plant pests such as weeds a problem on his farm, and he says he does. You ask if he is interested in wildlife, and he says he is not opposed to wildlife, but is not interested in improving their habitat on his farm. You ask if he has any concerns with energy or fuel use. He states he would like to cut down the amount of diesel fuel he uses and would consider some options to reduce fuel use. You and Mr. Smith go over to the stream. You verified there are some gullies where concentrated flows of water enter the stream. You notice the water is very muddy. You review the bank condition element of SVAP and determine the score to be 3. In several places, you notice some flint chips in the fields adjacent to the stream, which is a good indication that Native Americans may have occupied these fields. You use your camera to take some pictures of the flint chips, stream banks, and gullies. The two of you head back to his farmstead. You notice that all areas are vegetated or covered and there are no bare soil areas. You notice that all pesticide containers are properly stored and there is no evidence of spills. You notice that his fuel tanks have a berm around them and there are no areas that shows excess fuel spillage. You ask if he has any concerns about air quality, such as odors, dust, or greenhouse gases, and he says he has not noticed any problems and is not concerned about those. Before you leave, you review the resource concern checklist and make sure you have completed the checklist for all concerns on cropland and farmsteads. You ask for a little more background on his operation, such as, what are his sources of labor? Who helps him make decisions on the farm? Is he receptive to trying new things? Does he consider the farm profitable? He states that he is the main source of labor, but he does occasionally hire some part-time help. His grandson also helps out in the summer months. He makes the decisions on the farm, but his wife does have input. He has done things the same way for years, but since his profits have decreased, he might be willing to change some things as long as they are not too excessive. You thank Mr. Smith for his time and schedule another visit for next week. You tell him that you will have some alternatives for him to consider. As soon as you get back to the office, you pull out the NRCS CPA 6 Assistance Notes form from your case file and update the client's objective statement to include more quantifiable information on his productivity goals. It is important to quantify the objective as much as possible so that NRCS and the client can better assess when the objective has been met. You also update the NRCS CPA 6 Assistance Notes form to record important resource inventory information such as cropland conditions, stream conditions, farmstead conditions, and general information as well as the next meeting date. Pause the video to review the assistance notes in more detail. That concludes this video on the field visit. Next, we will review the resource concern checklist that you completed in the field.